Luke's out in Australia and I'm here in Washington State. So we got a bit of a time difference, but we made it happen. And Luke, you were telling me about your practice before you came to our Sangha, being involved with some Tibetan culture Buddhism, and then finding the Theravada way. Is that
Yeah,
right?
correct. Yep, yep,
Huh.
yep. Yeah. Yeah, so it's been quite a journey for me, and I feel blessed to have found the Dhamma. I've been through a fair bit over the years, marriage, divorce, kids, all that stuff, like a lot of people. And the Dhamma has been, being able to come back to the Dhamma has been a real blessing for me. Been great.
Yeah, me as well.
Yeah, good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually right now I'm in the process. My wife and I, we were together 15 years and we separated in May, so I'm
Oh,
going through
wow.
that myself and I'm
Yeah.
finding the same thing. Refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dhamma, and especially refuge in the Sangha. It's
Mm,
been really helpful for me to have friends like you and Brett and DJ and Dhammarato and everybody, Mikey, like everybody there, just so helpful. So it's
cool.
like to me a really important part of practice that, I know that you talked about having a Western perspective of sorts when you came into the Dhamma. And a lot of the times, from the Western perspective, the Sangha element of the Triple Gem is kind of hard to find, because we start looking in books, we start looking at, monastics and thinking, well, they've got it and I don't, and I can't find it, and other such things like that. And so, really, in some ways, tripping into the Dhamma is really, really lucky. And then finding actual refuge in a Sangha that practices well is
Mm,
honestly just as lucky as finding the Dhamma in the first place, in my opinion, because that's really one of the ways. Earlier, you were telling me about meditation practice getting a little dry,
yeah,
little maybe repetitive in some ways, So I think this is a really great way that we can get each other going and make sure that we don't get too dry, because a lot of dry stuff produces a lot of friction and we want to cool down,
yeah, definitely, definitely.
right?
Yes,
So
yes.
tell me about your practice then. Tell me what that's like.
Yeah, so I sit every morning when I get up. I sit for 30 minutes. Sometimes a bit longer if I can, if I've got the time, you know. Yeah, and like I say, in recent times it's been quite good since I've discovered you guys, and I've listened to a few of Dhammarato's, like where he's given advice to people about meditation and how to meditate and about gladdening the mind and all that. And yeah, I found that. And the other one was about being able to control like the breathing, like purposefully taking a long breath in, take and a long breath out and stuff. Like I went through a long period where I was like, oh no, you just watch the breath. You don't have any, and that was, yeah, my mind would just boom, boom, straight away it'd be gone. I just couldn't keep on it. So
Yep.
yeah, that's been helpful as well. But yeah, I suppose one of the things was just after some tips around, what different methods we can use to gladden the mind and things like that. If there's anything in that sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Mm,
and one of the things that I like to keep in mind about anapanasati, okay, practice in particular, is that when we practice anapanasati correctly, it fulfills the four foundations of mindfulness and it helps to, and it will eventually, develop and balance out those seven factors of awakening, which really that's what we need to do, not just that, but it suppresses the five hindrances and it brings forth, those five factors of the first jhana, that application and sustainment of thought or mind to the wholesome, the success and satisfaction that come up from being able to do that when we set out to do it. And then also that single-mindedness of pursuit about, getting the mind composed and collected so that we can start to see things clearly. And so what you're talking about when you're talking about taking a long breath intentionally is exactly what Dhammarato teaches us from the start, which is that anapanasati is a change model. So we're making a wholesome change when we're studying each step. And that's something I like to keep in mind for myself as well. We have those 16 steps in anapanasati. And for me, as a Westerner, when I thought in numerical order, in a very linear fashion.
yeah, yeah.
And come to find out, that really isn't what we're talking about. We're more talking about dance moves, you know, something plays a certain note and we move our feet a certain way and we're kind of in rhythm with the beat and, you know, we're really moving along with things. And so in this way, we can see how Anapanasati fulfills those four foundations of mindfulness, because the object is really not always the breath like we normally think, because we think Anapana means breathing in and out. But in a way, we could kind of drop the breathing and we could start to think of it as taking in the wholesome and getting out the unwholesome, okay? And doing that with mindfulness, you know? So we're talking about change. We're talking about changing habits, you know? So gladdening the mind, finding out what is skillful and what is unskillful. So is taking a long breath skillful? That's great. Take that in. Let's have some long breaths and get the body nice and relaxed. You know, what are the ways that we can relax and calm the body? You know, how can we better pay attention to what's going on in the body, whether we're paying attention to our hands or our feet or the body as a whole? We're looking at the different habits that we have about how we approach basically experience, how the mind is putting together what's happening right now. And when we see that it's doing it in a way that, you know, brings about dissatisfaction, right then and there, we change it. You know, so this is that gladdening of the mind. And really, in a way, taking a long breath is gladdening the mind, because we're taking control of the breath. And in order to do that, we're actually changing what the mind is doing right then and there. You know, so breathing seems pretty automatic, but really it's something that we can influence. You know, it's something that we have the ability to kind of tap left and right, like the Buddha talks about with the water buffalo. You know, it's going down and we keep it out of the farmer's field with just little taps. We don't need to stop it or make huge adjustments, you know, because it's big. It's a water buffalo. We can't pick it up and move it, you know. So we got to influence it with these little taps. And the little taps that we're making are changing the thoughts, you know, changing the thoughts about how things are going, how I feel about it, whether or not I like it or dislike it, to something a little closer to what's happening right now. So one of my favorite things is to basically just pay attention to things as the way they are right now in this moment. So for example, in my house, my door's closed, it's locked. Now somebody could pick the lock, but it'll take them a little bit, you know, that kind of thing. But basically, I feel secure right now. So that's what I'm going to bring my attention to, because that's a wholesome perception, a wholesome thought, you know, and that's going to condition a wholesome attitude. We could also call it a mental state, you know, or the mind itself, you know, which is comprised of our thoughts, our attitudes, our perceptions, you know, those sorts of things. So when I'm developing a perception or a theme, you could call it, you know, and I'm composing the mind around this theme of safety, security, comfort, and satisfaction. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about that fifth factor of single-mindedness. I'm developing this theme of safety, satisfaction, comfort, security, and I'm allowing myself to calm down the stories. We'd normally call that like samatha, you know. In the Chinese, they translate that word as stopping. And I really like that translation because that really speaks to me. You know, I'm stopping my usual BS.
Yeah.
You know, and then Vipassana comes around. And Vipassana I like to call seeing. You know, so once we stop the stories, seeing isn't a problem. We start to see clearly. You know, we can start to notice the things like in this theme that's being developed of safety, security, comfort, and satisfaction. We start to see that, oh, everything's already all right. So we start to have thoughts like that. Everything's already okay. Not really a problem. Nothing to do. Nowhere to go. I feel good right now. I can feel how I want to feel. Not really an issue. I can do it. You know, and that really starts to develop the mental state, like the Buddha was called a lion, the mental state of a champion. You know, we no longer are a victim. We've come out of that childlike attitude of being a victim, and we come into being an adult, being able to stand on our own 2 feet, straight backed, no problems. We can handle whatever comes up in our experience because we have confidence, because we've seen ourselves do it again and again and get stuck in a hole of dukkha and dig ourselves right out of it, you know? So sometimes we get a little dry in our practice, like you were talking about. We start to stare at the dukkha, pick it up, take it home, dissect it, pull it apart, see what dukkha is connected to what dukkha and all of that kind of stuff. But that's not really the way that the Buddha talked about Anapanasati, because that's just kind of staring at what dissatisfaction we have instead of making that change then and there. You know, so really the practice of the Buddha takes us out of, like I was talking about those 16 steps, it takes us out of this linear thinking that we're normally so accustomed to. And it takes us into this present moment. again and again, as often as we can remember to do so. So we're no longer caught up in the past or chasing after an imagined future. Rather, we're actually seeing things as they are right now and dispelling the ignorance that is normally there, covering up what you could describe as paradise. We really do live in a paradise. Everything is really beautiful so long as we stop telling ourselves stories about how it's not and start looking at what's really there. It's a really wonderful way to practice, because really a lot of these things start to take care of themselves, because these thoughts condition these attitudes, condition these feelings and perceptions, which conditions the body. And it's all this nice feedback loop, no start, no end. So really no past, no future. Some people will say that a contemplative doesn't have a past or a future, that they're in tune with right now, right here, so they're no longer concerned with what comes next, because they know that whatever it is, by the time that it gets here, it'll be right now. You never wake up tomorrow, you always wake up today. And so if we can remember those things and collect the mind around that theme, this is really all we need. We have this big old tool truck available to us, like you talk about Dhammarado's videos, and I don't remember the last count, but I remember mention of something like 1,900 videos. Dhammarado's really wonderful in that way, because he's just out there making merit, and leaving us a lot of breadcrumbs to show us what correct practice looks like and what the teachings of the Buddha, as passed down from good friend to good friend, actually are, the ones that bring relief right now. They bring a cooling off right now. There's no waiting. We start with panya, we start with wisdom, and then we develop that collectedness, that samadhi, and this brings about that morality, that sila. Because if you don't want anything, you're not likely to stab somebody or go get it or get wasted drunk and do something silly. All these things are no longer really a problem, because, like I said, with clear sight comes the recognition that, man, I was really ignorant, because everything's actually okay right now. No matter what's going on, I can dig it. I can do it. It's not a problem. And so that's one of the things to recall, is we've got this big tool truck, so we want to make sure that the tools that are on it, that we don't take everything with us all the time, because that gets heavy, so we kind of develop these nice, wholesome thoughts. We pick a few that we really like, that mean something to us.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that Westerners run into as a problem as well, is they hear about things like, oh, in Tibetan Buddhism, they're always chanting a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, or whatever, but to a Westerner, that doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean anything. Maybe it sounds cool, but really what it is magical thinking. And the thing about Buddha is he says, no magical thinking. We're done with that. We're done with superstition. If we look at the Thai forest tradition in the lineage of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, which is the lineage that Dhammarado came from, with Ajahn Po at Wat Suan Mok, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says many times, in the noble ones, there is not one hint of superstition. It's done. We're done with Sayasastra, which is the word that he used to describe superstition. He also called it sleepology, or the science of being asleep on the job, of not paying attention to what's here now. And the opposite of that he described is Buddhology, the science of awakening. And he said that's what the Buddha taught, is a real science, because we have a hypothesis about what's wholesome and what's unwholesome, and then we investigate, because that's our noble right view, is investigation, because the only view that can truly transcend all views is one that does not collapse into another view. It stays as a wave rather than becomes a particle. That's why he encourages us, as often as we can remember, to investigate experience, to keep looking, to stay in input mode as often as we can remember to. And that way we can really see the difference between wholesome and unwholesome. And the way that they talk about it in Pali is kusala and akusala. And that's one of the things that we talk about when we talk about someone being established in the Dhamma. They know what is wholesome and unwholesome. They know the way of practice, They no longer have to rely on superstition. They understand anicca, 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 anicca. And we call that impermanence or inconstancy or whatever, but I think it's a little easier to talk about it with a few more English words, The way I like to think about it is, nothing whatsoever in this world can be maintained to my liking for very long, if at all. So when I do have the wrong perception, the opposite one of Nietzsche, meaning I think I can maintain stuff. I don't think my sandcastles are going to get wiped away by the next wave. Then I suffer. I have dukkha. And then we think about anatta, which oftentimes gets us in trouble because we think of it as not self, which unfortunately for the Westerner sometimes brings about this idea that I've got to see how I'm not real, or I've got to destroy my ego, or something like this. But really, anatta describes something more like, if I have the wrong perception that I can maintain things to my liking, then I'm going to suffer. And anatta means I'm helpless to the rounds of birth and death at that point. Basically, I can't do anything about it because I'm blown about by the worldly winds. But if we can see anicca nature just like it is and understand that, hey, nothing is worth insisting upon, our strong opinions, nature doesn't care about them. it just bowls right through them. So it's okay to have opinions. I'm this, I'm that. It's just better to let them go before they bite us.
Yeah.
And so when we see these three things clearly, because they're all interrelated, and they're all emergent properties of anicca, it's not something to see separately. But when we see these three things related, we have a key right then and there, that dukkha. If dukkha's around, I know I have no clear sight. If craving's around, I know I'm going to have dukkha because I've started to build up this self that's going to take birth in this moment. And that's the other thing that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa taught is, let's stay with what we've got right here. Perhaps something happens after death, perhaps nothing happens after death. But if we practice like this right now, even death itself won't be a problem. And really, this is how Bhikkhu Buddhadasa described the goal of correct practice, is to be a human being with no problems. And it sounds really fantastic, but what it actually means is all that we see are opportunities to practice correctly. Each and every moment of experience is an opportunity to apply and sustain the mind to the wholesome, and the most wholesome thing is the Dhamma. So we can go on and on about it, and we can talk about it all the different ways and stuff, and different methods and techniques and everything like that. But I said, that's a really big truck, so we take some things off of it, some wholesome thoughts that fit with us. If we like the mantras that we hear in Pali or something like that, that's all well and good, but really those chants and everything, they worked a lot better when people understood what they meant. Right now, they sound like beautiful music to me, but if they're, interpreted correctly, then we can start to understand that, hey, what he was talking about when he was talking about chanting or recitation of a Buddha name, or, visualization of a deity, we're actually talking about gladdening the mind.
Yeah.
Deity practice is nothing other than envisioning the deity, understanding the qualities of that deity, and then bringing those qualities into the mind to develop them ourselves. You hear about these people practicing and they become the deity, and maybe some people have some cool visualization experiences or whatever, but the whole point is you're already a Buddha. You're already enlightened. You don't need to be more enlightened. Everything's already okay. And if we bring those qualities in the mind, we start to develop them in our language. And that's why the Buddha said, the Dhamma should always be taught in the local tongue, should always be talked about within the local culture. Because Buddhology travels all over the world, and everywhere that it goes, it picks up new clothing, and clothing serves two purposes: cover the private parts and express culture, so there's not really Tibetan Buddhism, there's Tibetan culture with Buddhism. There's Korean culture with Buddhism, Japanese culture with Buddhism, and for now, there's Western culture with Buddhism, but it's kind of a funky, ill-fitting kind of clothing, So like, sometimes it takes some good friends from elsewhere to explain that, hey, it's okay, we got it already, it's not a problem, this is the way to do it. And that's why association with the wise is one of those factors that brings us about to being established in the Dhamma. So it's really nice to have good friends. It really makes sense why the Buddha told Ananda, hey, don't say that. Good friends are the whole of the holy life.
Yeah.
Because just like the first statement of Zen, a direct transmission outside of the scripture, talk to each other about it, and we keep talking about it, and we keep checking in with each other. We're not checking on each other, because we're not teachers and students. The only reason we have students is because they make themselves that way. Friends don't have this hierarchy. We can just talk and talk. We don't have to impress each other. We don't have to prove anything to each other. We can just be who we are. Let each other show up just like it is right now, and then help each other. We can talk about the tools. So the way that Dhammarato talked about it to me was something along the lines of, do you like Coca-Cola? This is a wholesome thought. This can gladden the mind. If you really like drinking Coca-Cola, doesn't mean you're going to go drink a Coca-Cola afterwards if you're staying away from sugary drinks. But if you remember, ooh, yeah, pop, pop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is. These are really good mantras. And they seem a little silly, but if they seem a little silly and they get you smiling, they're doing the job, because
Yeah.
wholesome thoughts are the medicine for unwholesome thoughts. And the way we can think about that is something that's calm shakes around less. So it's like putting a camera on a tripod. And that way we can kind of see how the mind is working, and we can start to understand where we can insert those changes that'll bring around wholesome results.
Mm.
And so I like the idea of having a big tool truck. And if we need a different tool, we can always go back to it. The tool truck doesn't need to come with us everywhere. When the plumber goes in the house to fix the plumbing, he just takes what he needs. He doesn't bring the whole truck with him.
Yeah.
So that to me is probably one of the more skillful ways that I look at it myself, and it really adds some good old juice back into the practice to picture it in that way, because sometimes it does get a little dry. It gets a little dry, a little like slogging through quicksand, something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So if we can see that, then we can remember that one of the things that the Buddha taught also was that the practice of his Dhamma is beautiful in the start, beautiful in the middle, and beautiful in the end. And the Buddha didn't say something without, an intention to get us to learn how to practice correctly behind it. A Buddha comes up in the world to give a teaching, and it's neither incomplete nor overdone. So he's very intentional how he used his words. And so
Yeah.
when we reference that he said that about his teaching, we can remember that when things get dry, that's an indicator that we need to make a change to how we're practicing. We need to go back to the tool truck and grab something else and come on back and maybe deposit a few things that we used to use on the truck so we can keep them for later, just in case. But we don't need to keep them in the mind, because we are trying to clean it out. Arthur Conan Doyle talked about how Sherlock Holmes said that a man's mind is like his attic. So the more stuff that you shove up there, the more complicated that it gets, the more likely that it's going to be hard to maneuver around. And this is one of the actual qualities of the first jhana, is that the mind can be moved. We can point it at what we want to do. It's actually useful. It's ready for work. Now the work that we're talking about is seeing clearly, but to see clearly anything that we're doing is all that needs to be done, because then work can become play. And when we're playing, we're having a good time. Everything's all right.
Yeah.
So tell me about what you do in practice to gladden the mind.
Yeah. Coming back to the breath, obviously, if the body's feeling good, then I can use the breath. But one thing I do think about is that obviously there's times where the body doesn't feel so good. But having said that, I've found often, let's say you've had a heavy meal, or for some other reason your breathing doesn't feel great or your body doesn't feel great. I've found focusing, and even the feet, focusing on the hands or feet, like the extremities, they still, that sort of can work for you. Like I've found that quite
Absolutely.
helpful to go, okay, what am I like? How do my hands feel right now? Let's put my attention on that. Or how do my feet feel right now? And they feel, they feel good. They feel calm. They feel comfortable. So that's kind of been a useful tool, I guess. And I
Yeah.
find, I find with mood as well, which I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the third foundation of mindfulness is kind of like your mood. I've heard it
Yeah.
translated as mood. I can
Yep.
almost like clockwork pick what kind of mood I'm in at a certain, like first thing in the morning I'm a bit tired, so maybe the thoughts are a bit grumpy and not so wholesome, But then, I'll have a coffee and I'll start to go about my day, and suddenly, I feel okay now. And then I'll start to work, and then something will happen at work, and the mood might drop a bit. And like yesterday, I was grumpy about something, and it took me a long time to shake it, But being able to, so I guess what I'm trying to develop is what finding things I can do in those situations, say with work, where someone says something or a certain job doesn't go or thing doesn't go as I planned, how to be able to just go, it's okay. Like I tend to kind of cling to this idea that, oh, it's going to go this way, and then when it doesn't, oh, I'm struggling. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm, you talk about the different tools, just things I want to think about to how to help in those situations.
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind for me when I hear that kind of stuff is I don't have to get it right. And this is one of the things that we forget as we move into adulthood, because as a young child, we have no problem with that. We don't even have to think about it. We just know we're not going to get it right. You pop out of the womb, you start walking, you fall over, you run into a table, and immediately then, you probably start crying. Mama comes out and picks you up, soothes you, all these sorts of things. And then everything's okay. She puts you down, you go back to play. It's like an antelope, maybe we could think about it. If they're running away from a lion, they're real stressed at that point. They got a lot of juices flowing, a lot of chemicals flowing. But as soon as they're safe again, they shake it out. You watch their body shake, and then they go right back to either playing or looking for food and water. And so this is kind of what we're talking about when we talk about equanimity, because that antelope or that child is able to put forth the right amount of effort to get things moving without getting caught in a rut. So the beauty of the human mind is when we're caught in a rut, we can recognize it and we can make a change and come out of it right then and there. And then nature takes care of that rut. Water washes the dirt back in and eventually it's filled back in, just like a pathway or a road. So I've heard you talk before about process addiction, and really, the Dhamma's all over process addiction. We're all process addicts. And we're constantly recognizing that and then putting forth the right effort to come out of it. Hey, that's my old habit. That's one of the things that I like to do after I tell myself I don't have to get it right, is I like to kind of poke a little fun at it. Oh, there I am getting upset again. Ha ha ha, look at me. I don't need to do that right now. I used to think I needed to do it, but not anymore. How nice it is. What a relief. I can just be okay right now. I can take one breath. If we hear like Thich Nhat Hanh, he says it a lot in his talks. You can heal yourself with just one breath. And I really didn't understand what that meant for a while. I was like, what's he talking about? That seems crazy. That guy's off his rocker. He must be some sort of saint. But if we hear him and we listen and we practice the Dhamma, we can see all it really takes, like we were talking about earlier, is taking control of the mind and having a wholesome long breath and thinking, oh man, it's so nice I can breathe in long like this right now. Wow, it's such a relief to breathe out long like that. Man, even in the middle of all this junk that's happening, I can be happy with what I've got right here and right now. The ability to breathe, a body that still works. I hear this guy chatting at me and I'm upset about it, but God, it's nice to have ears that work. Wow, what a great time I'm having listening to this gentleman talk to me about all of his problems. I used to get upset and try to change people's feelings so that I felt comfortable, but man, it's great to just recognize that this ear and that sound, there's nobody here to listen to it. That's just happening. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, does it make a sound? No. No, it doesn't. It just happens, but if we're there to listen to it, then listening happens. And it doesn't mean we are listening. It just means that listening is happening. And when we can remove ourselves like that, even, that's one of the things Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about a lot, is developing the theme of emptiness. So we have that tool as well, sunyata. We can remove the one that listens and just understand that listening is happening, or sweating is happening, whatever it is. So this could be a nice tool as well. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't negate existence or lead to nihilism or anything like that, because what we're actually recognizing is that nature is running the show. Reality is the actual boss of what's going on right now. And if I argue with reality, which is basically the perception of Nietzsche, I can do it, it's mine, it's me, I'm going to pick it up and change it like a Rubik's Cube until it's the way I want it, not going to happen. So we get dukkha, So if we recognize anatta, that all of this is really just nature unfolding, ear and sound and ear consciousness, those things in paticca samuppada, the dependent origination cycle, we can use that tool to heal ourselves in just one breath, to come back to this moment, to let go of the attachment that's causing us to get into dissatisfaction, and if we get really caught up on it, we can call our friends, and this is, again, taking refuge in the Sangha. So we can take refuge in the Dhamma if we're upset, we can listen and use that tool the Buddha gave us of those 12 links of dependent origination, and we can stop it at any point, so long as we catch it. Doesn't matter if we've already taken birth and we're becoming this thing, we can say, no, not right now. I'm going to cut that right there, just like a string. Pinocchio cut his strings and became a real boy. So anytime we recognize that we're dancing on the strings, no, I don't want to do that right now. Clip, 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 and we're free again. So again, it's right here, right now is really what we're coming back to over and over and over again, because whatever happens next, if we are right here, right now, we can handle it. It's no problem. We don't have to worry about what this guy's going to do. Deadlines for a project. If we're sweating about a deadline, oftentimes it's because we're imagining not meeting it. We're imagining that we're going to try to get something done. But if we remember Yoda from Star Wars, there is no try. Throw that right out of the mind. It's an unwholesome thought. It's actually the hindrance of doubt. I doubt that I'm going to get it done, so I'm just going to give it the old college try. Oh, I did my best, but I didn't make it. And really, people say that to relieve themselves of the responsibility of not doing, because they're scared that they'll fail. They have that doubt. So if we see that, boom, throw it out with the wholesome thought of, I don't have to get it right. If I don't meet the deadline, I'm not going to die. Because this is what really happens is we get caught up in these ideas of, we could call it birth or death, but we could really call it life or death situations. We make everything about life and death. If I don't meet the deadline, I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to get paid. And if I don't get paid, I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to have shelter. I'm not going to have medicine. I'm not going to have clothing. And we can see why the Buddha made these the 4 requisites. Because anytime one of them is threatened, we can pretty much forget about higher thinking. So we have to actually be in this moment to recognize, hey, man, I've been doing this job a long time. Even if something bad does happen, I can get another job. I can do it, but really, I'm just going to do my best to meet this deadline, and I'll probably get it done. I've done it before, And the last time I didn't meet the deadline, I was still breathing. I was still eating. I was still drinking, wearing clothes, and having a house. I was still able to provide for my family without, worrying so much. And really, the worry is part of what makes it hard to meet the deadline. So it's kind of like, I was in the Army for a while, and snipers had a saying in the Army. They said, you can run, but you're just going to die tired, and and it's the same with the dukkha. Okay, the dukkha just wears us out. It makes things dry. It makes us tired. So if we can remember that kind of a wholesome thought there, like, I don't need to rush. I got plenty of time. If I do rush, I might screw it up anyways, so why not put forth my best effort, which is one's noble right effort, just enough to get it done, just enough to come out of dukkha. We don't want to swing to either extreme. We want to be right in the middle path, the middle way of practice, And so when we think about it in that way, we can catch that dukkha. So when it comes up at work or whatever, aha, I see you, Mara, telling me stories about how I'm not going to make it, but you could stay as long as you want. You're my best friend. You've been here my whole life. You can have some tea if you want to, but I'm not going to act out the script that you're handing me, because now I see things as they are, that I'm already okay, that I can do this, that everybody around me, they can do what they want, but I'm the owner of my actions. I'm the adult. I'm standing on my own 2 feet, So I really like those tools right there when I get in the world, because they help us keep that seclusion. Like you said, you sit in the morning, you get into seclusion from the hindrances, you clean out the mind, and you're secluded from the world. But really, the value of that is what the Buddha taught about lokutara citta, the mind that is in the world but not of it. It's celestial. It's risen above. It's out of the gutter. And so when we see that mind wanting to dive right back in the gutter, we can say, nah, I see you. No, don't do that. We used to do that. We're not doing it anymore. I'm glad that I saw you so that I could make this change, So I really like those tools. I think that they help me out a lot, especially I'm going to school right now. So with my schoolwork, I tend to procrastinate at times, and I have to catch it. I see you. I know you want to wait until closer to the deadline because you think anxiety is going to help you, but it's not. It's just going to make you tired and stressed, and then you're going to jam everything out at the last minute and probably get upset with yourself for not making a good grade, So I have to catch it then, because that's wisdom, is seeing where things are going. That's Panya, is saying, no, I've been down that road before. It's covered in shit. I'm not going to walk down it. I'm going to go down a different road.
Yeah.
That way we don't even have to deal with it, We can cut it. And that's those strings. Clip, be done with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really relate to that with the work, what you're talking about with that idea. And I it actually makes me laugh a bit at myself, because the amount of times I've been like, oh no, I've got this new thing that I haven't come across before. I'm a data analyst, business analyst.
Nice.
New piece of data, new whatever that I haven't come across before. Suddenly I have this anxiety of, shit, I'm not going to understand it. I'm not going to know how this works. I'm going to fail at this. And
Yep.
but I've done this for I've been in this industry that I work in for nearly 30 years, and it's never happened. I've always worked it out. And yet I still do it after 30 years. I still fall into that trap. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? You know it's going to be okay. Why do you keep falling into this trap over and over and over and over again?
Yep.
And it just like, yeah, and I went through it yesterday, exactly that, where I got given something that someone else had done who'd gone on leave, so they're not around. Someone said, you need to work out what they've done and you need to explain it to someone else. And all that stress came up of, oh, I'm not going to understand this. I'm not going to be able to explain it to. And sure enough, I sat down for a few hours, and at the end of the day, I'm like, oh yeah, makes sense. But I
Yeah.
still went through all that dukkha, you know. It's just,
Yep. And
yeah,
that's one way I like to think about it. And I heard somebody say it one time, and at first, again, I didn't really understand it. But pondering on it and such, it came a little more clear. Somebody asked, hey, if there's no soul or no self, what is reborn? And the person responded, they said, your bad habits. And
yeah,
so, like, you see that cycle right there of, man, I've done this over and over again. I keep falling into this trap, and I keep falling into the trap that I'm setting for myself. And I do it too all the time, and we get better and better as we start to pay attention as to how to not fall into the trap. Or even better, at the start is we fall into the trap and then we figure out how to get out of it.
yeah,
And this is like the Buddha talks about when he talks about the arrow. Somebody shoots a cat with an arrow, or a guy, I say cat, I think they're interchangeable, but shoots a man with an arrow, and the first thing that the regular worldly person wants to do is start groaning and moaning. Who shot me? What's the arrow made out of? What was the tribe of the guy that shot it at me? Where is this? What kind of treatment am I going to get? Tell me all about it. In the Sotapan, it might be in there for a while, the guy that's been established in the Dhamma, but he knows how to pull it out, so maybe it'll get a little infected, maybe it'll get some green to it, and start to take on a tint or something like that, but he still knows to get it out, and then eventually we make it so that we're starting to play dodgeball, and then eventually we just don't step foot on the battlefield anymore. And
mm,
that's a really nice idea, and it's a really great thing to keep in mind, but we don't have to worry about being done, and I think that's one of the beautiful parts of this practice is even that we don't need to rush. As a matter of fact, if we try to rush it, we're going to get overconfident and we're going to fall right on our face, and then we're going to need our friends to pick us back up and show us where we were arrogant and tell us how to be a little better next time, and that's quite all right. That's the point of good friends.
yeah,
We don't have to get it right. We got a lot of knowledge, got a lot of wisdom. We just have to make sure that we're tapping into that tool truck, that source of that wisdom and knowledge, so that we don't get ahead and start rushing things and thinking that, oh, I'm done. I got no more dukkha ever. It's never going to happen. But really, that's just another trap, Ooh, crap, cat's jumping across the screen. But that's just another trap that we set for ourselves, because
yeah,
then we get extra dukkha the next time it comes up, So we don't have to worry about being done. We don't have to worry about getting it right. We don't have to worry about any of that other than paying attention to what we're doing right now, and remembering what works and what doesn't for the whole of the teaching, which is dukkha, dukkha nirodha. How do we see the dukkha? That's the duty of the First Noble Truth. How do we see it? What's the best way that I can see it before it turns into an unwholesome act of speech or an unwholesome bodily act,
mm,
And eventually we get to the point where we start catching the unwholesome thoughts. We start to talk to ourselves in language in the mind that makes it so that dukkha is guaranteed to be coming up at some point, and we say, aha, I see you. No, no, no. I got this good mood going on right now. I'm in the groove of wholesomeness. I'm not getting out of this groove. This is a good groove to be in. Like we talk about, there are things to wisely attach to. You talked about one earlier when you said the breath. That's a wise attachment. It's always in the here now. If you stop breathing, you're dead. At which point you don't have to do dukkha nirodha anymore. It's just never mind, start again, if that's what happens. But we don't even need to worry about that. So really, attachment to the breath is a great idea. Attachment to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. These are great ideas. The
Yeah.
Buddha said that if you have him as your kalyana mita, you're going to do just fine. You know what I mean? If you have him as your good friend, you're going to do just fine. And so we can take refuge in that Buddha mind. Once we clean out the mind, we can go ahead and take refuge in that clean mind. We can take refuge in the teachings, in the Dhamma itself, when we remember those concepts, and we can take refuge in the Sangha, in talking with each other, in making sure that our community is practicing well, because that's one of the things that you always heard about in the suttas is people would come from outside of the community that the Buddha was running, and they would go, man, every time I come here, everybody's just smiling. I know you guys must be doing something good because you're all happy. You got no problems. You're not rushing anything. You don't worry about a thing. You can sit under a tree and just have a good old time all by yourself. But you do it together, and that's really wonderful, and they become followers of the teaching right then and there. They'd say, we're going to take refuge in the Samana Gautama right now and for life, because they saw just how effective the Dhamma is. They got that confidence right then and there. And they started to practice in a way that was correct, that brought about a relief from dukkha right here, right now, again and again, as often as we can remember to put the teachings into effect. And really, that's mindfulness. That's sati. Samasati, I like to call it right remembering or right recollection, because we're recollecting the teachings in this moment and applying them appropriately so as to bring about the end of dukkha right now. So that's the thing. Sati delivers that wisdom, and it's lightning fast. The Buddha talked about it like an arrow. He didn't know about the speed of light because it was a way long time ago, but the mind is faster than the speed of light. It's so fast. And because of that, samasati can deliver wisdom to the point of contact real quick. And if we have contact, in the Pali they call it phassa, but in Paticca they call it samphassa. And that means contact, but defiled. Okay, defiled contact is the regular way that we go about the world. That's why those feelings arise and we start craving for something to be different, and then we start acting a little different, and eventually this leads to, the taking of birth and the becoming of a person. And we know what that all leads to. The consequence of birth is death. So then we end up getting really upset about whatever it is that's going on and thinking, man, I got to start over and try again. Let's wipe the whole slate clean. And all of a sudden we're back at samphassa again. But with wisdom, samphassa is just phassa. So if sati can remember that, like we were talking about contact at the ear earlier, sati delivers that wisdom quickly. We remember what's going on, remember to look at what's happening, remember to make a change to the wholesome, and then most importantly, we remember to congratulate ourselves. Because that's really one of the best tools that we have, and it's always with us, is every thought that we have can be made more wholesome. It can be made more beautiful. And if we happen to have just the most beautiful thought ever, we can make it more wholesome by congratulating ourselves for having had it. And then it's really just a wonderful party. And this is where that feeling of success, piti, comes from, is when we recognize that, man, I can do this. I've already done it. Wow, how nice it is. What a relief. And that's the satisfaction, So those 5 characteristics right there, applying and sustaining thought to the wholesome, success, satisfaction, and being single-minded in the pursuit of the end of dissatisfaction. And this is the first jhana. And the Buddha talked about it in the suttas as, when I'm in the first jhana, when I'm practicing the first jhana, my walking is celestial. My sitting is celestial. My laying down is celestial. Everything I do is celestial. And this is what he was talking about with that lokuttara citta. It's in the world, but it's not of it. It's actually above the normal way of doing things, like getting upset, getting spun up about stuff, getting the mind all nice and hot. Instead, he's cool as a cucumber all the time. He's confident. He's got no problems because he sees things as they are. So I really like that idea there of, we don't have to get it right. We can do whatever we need to do right now. No problems. I really like coming back to that, getting attached to that.
No, that's all good, man. That's all good. I I don't know if it's in the Pali Canon, but I've heard some people say it, that the Buddha said, I don't fight with the world, but the world fights with me.
Yes.
And I love that saying. It's like, I got no problem with anyone. And I actually do feel that way. Like some people, and I have my kids every now and again, who do you hate, Dad? Who do you? And I'm like, I don't hate anyone. I got no problem with anyone. There's people that do certain things that I think, oh man, that's unskillful, but
Yeah.
so I think that's what the Buddha's getting at, right? People have people come to him and, you this and you, and he's like, I got no problem with anyone.
Yeah.
I think that's
Not
such
at
a
all.
wonderful attitude to live with. It's just, I got no problem with people. Might have a problem with me, but I got no problem with anyone.
Absolutely. I love it. And it gets talked about in other ways too that remind me of it, like Thich Nhat Hanh, who I really admire just because they did so much beautiful work in
Mm.
Vietnam during the Vietnam conflict, and they did it 100% without attachment because they were able to practice correctly in that way, you know? So they
Mm.
had villages that were getting just bombed by the US and the North Vietnamese all the time, and they would go out and they'd rebuild them, you know, because they understood that nothing whatsoever can be maintained to my satisfaction for very long, if at all. And because they recognized that and they had right perception of that, we could also call it right view, you know, they were able to go and do the thing they needed to do with no problems. And what actually got Thich Nhat Hanh to leave that country was somebody came by when he wasn't in his room and they chucked a grenade in his room, trying to kill him, you know, because he was actually looked at as perhaps a sympathizer because he would help everyone. He didn't make distinctions of, oh, you're North Vietnamese, you're South Vietnamese. He said, you're a human being. And so they extended their help to all beings around them. They were friendly to everyone. And he would comment on this later and he would say, I do not have enemies. Those are the people that I am trying to help. And I really, really like thinking and pondering on that one because it's
Yeah.
exactly like what you just said. I don't quarrel with the world quarrels with me. And even when that's happening, I can be friendly. I just have to remember to practice correctly. And metta, or friendliness, is a natural result of correct practice. So is karuna, compassion. So is empathetic joy, feeling really good when other people feel good. You know, and so is equanimity. We talk about these as the Brahma Viharas, you know, and a lot of times we make them kind of a concentrated effort to bring them about, you know, but really these are natural outcomes of the noble practice. They
Yeah.
happen automatically when we're okay. When I love myself, warts and all, I don't care if a leper comes up to me and starts wanting to talk to me. I'm not going to shy away from him. Maybe I won't give him a hug because metta without wisdom is like Cathal was saying. You know, he called it ding dong wisdom or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
or ding dong metta. And I really appreciated that. I put that one in the toolbox for myself because I like to remember those things. I tend to sometimes be a little too welcoming at times. So,
Yeah.
you know, we have to remember to stay in the middle. So I really like that he gave us that treat. But, you know, I may not hug them, but I'm still going to accept them just as they are, where they are. And that was
Mm.
really what the Buddha was so good at is he met each person where they were at. And he was able to talk to them in such a way that they got it. You know, throughout the suttas, there's so many stories of people listening to a single discourse and they get it, you know, and they may not go any further than that, but they get it right then and there. And then they're on it. They're established in the Dhamma. You know, they can take it and they can do what they want with it because he was so good at
Mm.
meeting people where they were at
Mm.
improvisation and metaphor and leaving things in the abstract and letting people water the seeds of the wholesome on their own, which is really what a good friend does is, you know, reminds us, hey, man, you can do it and you can do it yourself, you know, and that's what he talked about when he said, make your refuge, you know, an island in yourself, somewhere that you can park it. No matter what's going on, you're good to go. So I really like that idea of no enemies, just people that, you know, you want
Yeah.
to help. And sometimes
Yeah.
helping is just letting them show up, letting them talk however they are and be however they are, and giving them basically a nice mirror to reflect upon, you know, just
Yeah.
being open, letting them see that. It's really wonderful. Really,
Yeah.
really wonderful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I find I listen to Ajahn Brahm a bit. I've been fortunate enough to spend a bit of time with him. And
Nice.
yeah, I find him a very skillful teacher at being able to know the right thing to say to people at the right time. Like you
Yeah.
listen to some of his talks and the way he'll talk to a certain group of people versus the way he'll talk to another group of people. He's able to, it's a skill that
Just switch it up.
Yeah, he's very good, and I guess that's why he's so popular. He's like when he comes to my town, and I go to he's like a rock star. Everyone wants a photo with him, and you can see he's just like he's not really bothered. What's the fuss about, sort of thing. He's pretty laid back sort of dude.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Getting to meet people like that is a real treat too, because you get to basically see, hey, look what's possible. Look what I could do if I just keep practicing, keep remembering to look and see what's going on and make that change. And you can see that there are people in the world that do it, and this is that mundane right view that's talked about in the mundane eightfold path is, there are contemplatives and Brahmins that have seen this world and the next. They've done it. They've accomplished the goal of the holy life. They are out there. It is possible to escape this cycle. It is possible to at least set yourself up for a good time at whatever comes next, whether it's the next moment or the next life, we don't know. But at least in the next moment, we know that there is the result of action. There is consequences to our actions. And if we practice right now, intentionally, making good actions, good choices, then we know that what comes next, it might be good, it might be bad, it might be whatever, but likely we're going to be able to deal with it in a way that sets us up for some kind of success, satisfaction. Things like this will actually be able to go ahead and be in the world, but not of it. And those people are such wonderful examples of that.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. And especially Ajahn Brahm is really inspirational because he came out to where you guys are at and he built a community of practitioners and lay people, and that's really beautiful. Wow. What a noble task, That's really gorgeous stuff. It really inspires people to be able to look at him and say, hey, he's doing something good. How do I get some of that? How do I act like that? It was really, really wholesome stuff. Really wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Very good, mate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Good to talk to you.
It's great to talk to you too. I hope we do it a lot more often, maybe sometime once a week or twice a week or whatever, how often you have convenience for, Like I said, I'm in school right now, so I basically have like 3 days a week that I'm occupied for 2 hours a night, you know what I mean? So other than that, I just do my homework and read Dhamma and talk Dhamma and, bop around on the Discord servers and such and just keep trying to stay in it throughout the day because I find it's just so beautiful. It's so wonderful.
That's wonderful, mate. They're very inspiring, mate. Very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. You are as well. I really appreciate it. Just making a call like this with me and talking with me like this really pumps me up, man. I just love having friends that are in the Dhamma. I really do. It's just the best thing.
That's awesome.
It really makes me smile.
That's awesome. All right, buddy. I better run and let you go.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Luke, man. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Cheers, Alex. Take care, man.
Cheers, Luke. Bye-bye.
Bye.